I was overlooked for the promotion again, watched colleagues celebrate, and quietly prepared a plan that changed everything by the following Monday. It happened again. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the email notification that had just pinged on my screen, the words glaring at me like a punch to the gut: promotion awarded to Z. James Reynolds. I stared at the name, not because I didn't know who it was, but because the sheer predictability of it left me numb. I had been passed over for the promotion, not for the first time, not even the second, but again, and the cumulative sting of it was almost too much to bear. All around me, my colleagues were celebrating. Balloons were floating in the hallway outside, cupcakes had appeared on the break room counter, and somewhere in the corner, someone had even hung a small, congratulatory banner. I watched them laughing, patting each other on the back, clinking coffee mugs in cheer. And I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a mix of frustration, resentment, and a burning desire to prove that the system, and the people who ran it, had made a grave mistake. I wanted to shout. I wanted to storm out, maybe fling my stapler across the room in dramatic protest. But instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to sit still. I had learned over the years that outbursts, no matter how satisfying in the moment, accomplished nothing. What had been overlooked, ignored, or undervalued could only be reclaimed through strategy, planning, and patience. I observed James as he smiled, basking in the attention, shaking hands, and accepting the accolades that I had worked tirelessly to deserve. Every project I had led, every extra hour I had put in, every late night spent double checking reports had somehow been overshadowed by charisma, timing, or favoritism. And yet, as I sat there, a plan began to form, not a petty plan of sabotage or revenge, but a calculated, quiet maneuver that would ensure the next Monday would mark a turning point. The office was buzzing with congratulations and small talk, but I felt detached from it all. My mind wandered to the months leading up to this moment, the projects I had led flawlessly, the praise I had received in performance reviews, the client presentations where I had dazzled, the problem-solving sessions that had kept our team afloat during crisis. Every achievement had been documented, every email meticulously filed as evidence of my competence. And yet, the system had overlooked me. It was infuriating, humiliating, and yet, strangely motivating. I realized that if I wanted to change the outcome, I couldn't rely on luck or recognition from those who had repeatedly failed to see my worth. I had to create an undeniable case for myself, something that could not be ignored, debated, or dismissed. As the celebration continued around me, I began sketching out the first steps of my plan in a small notebook I kept hidden in my desk drawer. I mapped out every project, every opportunity to demonstrate initiative, and every potential ally who might help me execute the strategy. I considered timing, resources, and impact, knowing that the next week would be critical. Every detail mattered. I needed to demonstrate not only my competence but my vision, my leadership, and my ability to turn ideas into results. And I knew that the most effective strategy would be quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. Not something that could be dismissed as brash or attention-seeking, but a series of precise moves that would shift perception, alter outcomes, and ultimately place me in a position no one could deny. By the time the office party wound down and the balloons were deflated, I had a clear outline of what I needed to accomplish. I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else to give me the credit I deserved. I would have to take it myself, using strategy and preparation rather than confrontation. The thrill of the plan filled me with energy I hadn't felt in weeks. While James and the others celebrated their temporary triumph, I felt a quiet sense of purpose. I would prove, without doubt, that I was not just capable, but exceptional, that the promotion I had been overlooked for was never about ability, but perception, and that I could change that perception in ways they would never anticipate. Late that night, after everyone had left the office, I stayed behind, meticulously reviewing project data, performance metrics, and the outcomes of every task I had completed. I drafted emails, prepared presentations, and outlined the steps I would take to demonstrate my leadership. The quiet hum of the office at night, usually oppressive, felt like an ally now. I had no one to answer to but myself, and in that solitude, the seeds of a plan began to grow into a blueprint for undeniable success. I knew that by the following Monday, everything could change. The excitement mingled with fear, but I welcomed both. I had been underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued for too long. This time, the system would see me, and it would have no choice but to acknowledge what had always been true: I was the one who deserved to lead. Monday arrived, bright and ordinary on the surface, but for me, it carried the weight of potential, the thrill of calculated anticipation. I arrived at the office early, long before anyone else, carrying my laptop, notes, and a carefully curated presentation I had spent the weekend refining down to the smallest detail. Every slide, every chart, every data point had been designed to tell a story, my story, and it needed to be undeniable. I didn't intend to shout, or to make dramatic speeches. I intended to demonstrate, with quiet authority and precision, that the promotion had been a mistake, and that I was, in fact, the person whose leadership would drive results. As I set up my materials, I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. This was no longer about recognition, it was about correction, about taking ownership of the trajectory of my career in a way that left no room for doubt. The office started to fill gradually. Colleagues trickled in, chatting and laughing about weekend plans, oblivious to the storm of intent I was harboring behind my calm exterior. James strolled past, smiling broadly. No idea that the carefully constructed narrative I had prepared would soon upend the perception of competence he had taken for granted. I could see the temporary smugness in his eyes, the same one that had always frustrated me. But today it would meet its match. I took a deep breath and began my day methodically, following the outline I had developed. Step by step, I initiated tasks that had been planned weeks in advance: data analysis projects, client outreach, updates to critical reports. Tasks that would reveal not just competence, but strategic thinking, foresight, and leadership potential. Every action was deliberate. Every decision was a demonstration. By mid-morning, the first ripple of recognition appeared. A colleague approached me, asking questions about the metrics I had been refining in secret. Genuinely curious and impressed by the depth and precision of my analysis, I responded calmly, confidently, guiding them through my findings, pointing out opportunities they had overlooked, and suggesting improvements they had not considered. Each interaction subtly reinforced my authority and demonstrated my vision without a hint of confrontation. I wasn't announcing myself as the better candidate. I was showing it, quietly, methodically, irreversibly. The tension I had felt the night before gave way to a quiet satisfaction. I could see the effect on those around me, eyes widening, eyebrows lifting, nods of agreement, and murmurs of admiration as they realized the scale and quality of my work. Lunchtime arrived, but I barely noticed it. The office buzzed with casual chatter, but my mind was focused entirely on executing the next stages of my plan. I had arranged a series of brief one-on-one meetings with key team members and supervisors under the guise of project updates, knowing that these interactions would serve as a platform to highlight my strategic insight, problem-solving ability, and leadership potential. Each meeting was meticulously rehearsed in my mind: anticipate questions, prepare data-driven answers, illustrate opportunities, and subtly reinforce that I was the one who could lead effectively. As the conversations unfolded, I could feel the subtle shift in perception. Colleagues who had previously dismissed my ideas now leaned forward, nodded, and engaged actively. Supervisors asked follow-up questions, requested deeper analysis, and even suggested that I lead initiatives that had previously been reserved for others. I suppressed a smile. Patience was key. The crescendo of recognition would come later. The afternoon brought the most critical part of my plan, a live demonstration of a new workflow improvement I had developed, designed to increase efficiency across multiple departments. I had tested it thoroughly over the weekend, anticipated every possible flaw, and prepared a visual presentation that demonstrated not only the benefits, but also the measurable impact. I called the team together, presenting my findings with confidence and clarity. I didn't speak loudly or theatrically. I spoke with precision, guiding the team through the logic, metrics, and outcomes. As I outlined the results, I noticed subtle reactions: whispers of approval, raised eyebrows, glances exchanged between colleagues. Even James, who had previously assumed authority by default, listened attentively, no longer in the position of casual superiority, but as one who now had to acknowledge that my approach had merit. I maintained my composure, letting the data speak for itself, letting the results demonstrate the gap between perception and reality. By late afternoon, the momentum had fully shifted. Supervisors began seeking my input on decisions that had previously excluded me. Colleagues started soliciting advice, referencing my recommendations in team discussions. The subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement of my leadership potential was everywhere. And all the while, I felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction. Not vindictive, but profoundly gratifying. I hadn't announced my superiority, hadn't confronted anyone with accusations or resentment. I had let the work, the strategy, and the results tell the story. It was undeniable. I had shifted perception, reclaimed authority, and demonstrated that the promotion had overlooked someone who was not only capable, but exceptional. As the day drew to a close, I reviewed the results of my plan, internally celebrating the small victories that cumulatively demonstrated my competence. The subtle shift in recognition had begun, and I knew it would solidify over time. I had taken what could have been a humiliating setback and transformed it into a quiet, methodical triumph. The exhilaration I felt wasn't just about proving others wrong, it was about proving to myself that I had the discipline, intelligence, and foresight to change my circumstances through preparation and action rather than frustration or resentment. That night, as I left the office, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't known in years, a deep, enduring understanding that setbacks weren't failures, but opportunities to strategize, prepare, and emerge stronger. The following morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of quiet purpose, knowing that the real momentum of my plan would begin to compound today. Monday had been about demonstrating competence and planting the seeds of recognition. Tuesday, I knew, would be about showing influence, initiative, and strategic foresight in a way that could no longer be overlooked. As I walked through the doors, I could already feel the subtle shift in atmosphere. Colleagues glanced my way with a newfound respect or perhaps curiosity, unsure how to place this sudden authority that seemed to radiate from me, unspoken yet undeniable. Even James, who had worn his usual confident smile, now moved with a hint of uncertainty, aware, whether consciously or not, that the hierarchy he assumed was no longer fixed. I spent the morning initiating a series of coordinated improvements across multiple teams, a plan I had spent the previous weekend perfecting. Each suggestion was crafted to enhance efficiency, demonstrate my understanding of broader operations, and showcase a level of foresight that could not be mistaken for coincidence or luck. I circulated detailed emails outlining the proposed changes, complete with metrics, visual aids, and projected outcomes. I made a point of doing so in a tone that was collaborative rather than authoritative, subtle enough to avoid overtly challenging the status quo, yet precise and clear enough to ensure the value of my proposals was unmistakable. As the day progressed, I began receiving responses. They weren't just polite acknowledgments, they were thoughtful questions, requests for clarification, and expressions of appreciation for the initiative I was taking. The shift was tangible. By mid-morning, my efforts had caught the attention of one of the senior supervisors who had previously been critical of my work. He stopped by my desk under the pretense of casual conversation, but I could see in his eyes that he had noticed the changes I had been implementing. "I saw your email about the workflow updates," he said, leaning slightly over my monitor. "Interesting approach. I'd like to discuss it in the meeting later today." I nodded calmly, inwardly savoring the moment. This was no longer just about recognition from peers, it was acknowledgement from those with authority, a step closer to claiming the legitimacy I had long been denied. I knew that every carefully crafted action I had taken was now producing ripples of influence that extended far beyond my immediate team. As the morning bled into afternoon, I focused on executing the next stage of my plan, leveraging my growing influence to build alliances with colleagues across departments. This required a careful balance of subtle persuasion, demonstration of competence, and an almost imperceptible assertion of leadership. I scheduled impromptu one-on-one check-ins under the guise of collaboration, during which I presented actionable insights, offered solutions to persistent challenges, and highlighted the potential benefits of adopting my workflow improvements. Each interaction was deliberate, designed to show that I was not only capable of executing tasks but of guiding teams toward measurable success. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, colleagues began deferring to my judgment in discussions, asking my opinion before others, and acknowledging the value of my contributions. By mid-afternoon, the impact of my efforts became even more tangible. A project that had previously been stalled due to indecision and lack of clear direction suddenly gained momentum under my guidance. Team members who had once dismissed my suggestions began implementing my recommendations, producing measurable improvements in efficiency and output. I documented every step, every milestone, and every positive outcome, knowing that these records would later serve as undeniable proof of my capability. I remained composed, speaking only when necessary, letting results speak louder than words. The transformation was almost mesmerizing to observe. Skepticism gave way to respect, doubt shifted into recognition, and my influence became increasingly apparent to everyone in the room. The most satisfying moment came during the afternoon departmental meeting. As I presented updates on the workflow improvements and highlighted measurable gains, I noticed subtle shifts in posture, tone, and engagement from my colleagues. Questions were directed to me first, ideas were discussed with reference to my recommendations, and the senior supervisor, previously dismissive of my proposals, nodded approvingly. Even James, who had assumed he would dominate the conversation as usual, listened intently, offering comments that revealed his grudging acknowledgement of my expertise. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The room itself became the evidence of my growing authority, the silent acknowledgement that my work was not only valid but essential. By the end of the day, the results were undeniable. My proposals were being implemented, colleagues were relying on my judgment, and supervisors were acknowledging my contributions in ways that could no longer be ignored. The careful strategy I had devised, months in the making, refined over weekends and late nights, was bearing fruit in real time. The quiet plan I had nurtured in the shadows had transformed into visible, tangible authority, and as I shut down my laptop that evening, I felt a profound satisfaction, not the fleeting thrill of recognition, but the deeper, enduring triumph of having turned frustration into action, doubt into proof, and oversight into opportunity. That night, I reflected on the journey so far. The promotion I had been denied was no longer a mark of failure. It was the catalyst that had forced me to act with focus, discipline, and precision. I had leveraged the setback not as a source of resentment, but as a framework for strategic action. I had transformed the initial humiliation into a platform for demonstrating undeniable competence and leadership. And I realized something critical. Success is rarely about immediate recognition. It is about preparation, execution, and the quiet, relentless commitment to proving one's value through results. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. The plan I had been executing all week had begun to yield tangible results, but I knew the ultimate test would come today. It was the day of the executive meeting, a gathering where leadership decisions were made, promotions discussed, and influence measured. I arrived early, armed with documentation, charts, and reports that illustrated every milestone I had achieved, every process improvement I had implemented, and every tangible impact my work had created over the past months. Unlike previous weeks when my presence had gone largely unnoticed, today the air itself seemed charged. Colleagues who had once dismissed me now gave subtle nods of acknowledgement as I passed, a quiet but unmistakable recognition of the authority I had earned. Even James, usually so assured, met my eyes briefly with a flash of uncertainty that spoke volumes. I set up my materials meticulously, reviewing the key points one last time, ensuring that every detail of my performance, strategy, and results could not be questioned. I had learned that triumph is rarely about raw talent alone, it is about precision, preparation, and timing. As the meeting commenced, I observed the room carefully. Executives and supervisors filed in, the atmosphere professional yet tinged with casual tension. This was the arena in which my efforts would finally be measured against the standards of leadership. I did not seek to dominate the conversation through volume or force. Instead, I relied on clarity, data, and the undeniable success I had quietly cultivated throughout the week. Every slide, every figure, every carefully annotated note was a testament to my foresight, competence, and capacity to lead. When the discussion turned to departmental initiatives and ongoing projects, I seized the opportunity. I presented the workflow improvements, client management strategies, and cross-team coordination initiatives I had orchestrated, articulating not only their immediate impact, but their long-term potential for scaling efficiency and profitability. The room listened intently. Questions were directed to me first, suggestions were built on my recommendations, and my analysis was acknowledged without interruption or dismissal. Even the most skeptical supervisors nodded in agreement, recognizing that my proposals were not speculative, but grounded in measurable, repeatable results. At that moment, the room itself became a stage on which my work and planning spoke louder than any self-promotion could. I was no longer overlooked, I was indispensable. By mid-morning, the culmination of my efforts was evident. Discussions about upcoming leadership opportunities shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, toward my direction. Colleagues and supervisors, who had previously assumed James or others were the natural choices, now considered my initiatives, leadership qualities, and strategic contributions as central to the conversation. Each point I made was supported by evidence, emails, charts, timelines, and reports meticulously prepared over the preceding week. No assumptions could be made about my competence. The facts spoke for themselves. Every suggestion I offered, every idea I highlighted, demonstrated that I was not only capable of performing at the next level, but had already been acting in that capacity. The tipping point came during a discussion about a critical client presentation scheduled for the following week. I volunteered to lead it, citing my preparation, insights, and previous experience with the client's account. The room paused, a moment of quiet acknowledgement passing among executives. There was no argument, no protest. Even James, usually quick to assert himself, deferred. The decision was unanimous, though unspoken. I would lead. In that instant, the recognition I had long sought was undeniable. It wasn't a handout, nor a courtesy, it was a reflection of merit, effort, and the strategic planning I had employed to make it impossible to ignore my contributions. My quiet preparation had shifted perception and altered the reality of my standing in the organization. The afternoon was a blur of further meetings, approvals, and collaborative discussions, all reinforcing the shift that had begun that Monday. My colleagues sought my input, supervisors acknowledged my recommendations, and even the casual office chatter now referenced my strategies and insights. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not from superficial acknowledgement, but from the realization that my persistent, methodical approach had yielded a transformation in both perception and opportunity. I had taken what could have been repeated humiliation and turned it into undeniable authority. The promotion that had been denied was no longer a distant goal, it was imminent, inevitable, and fully deserved. By evening, as the office emptied, I reviewed the week's achievements with quiet satisfaction. I had not only demonstrated competence, but had reshaped the narrative of my career trajectory. The doubters had been silenced, not by confrontation, but by evidence. The laughter and skepticism that had once seemed insurmountable had been transformed into respect and acknowledgement. I realized that true influence and recognition are rarely achieved through force or anger. They are earned through preparation, strategic action, and the unwavering commitment to excellence. In that moment, I understood the profound truth: the most powerful victories are those that emerge quietly, deliberately, and inexorably from one's own efforts. That night, I reflected on everything: the repeated disappointments, the overlooked accomplishments, the frustration, and the meticulous plan that had changed the course of my professional life in less than a week. The journey had been exhausting, intense, and fraught with uncertainty, yet it had also been exhilarating, transformative, and deeply affirming. I had learned that setbacks were not indicators of failure, but invitations to demonstrate resilience, creativity, and determination, and as I turned off my desk lamp, I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the plan I had conceived in silence had not only corrected a past oversight, but had cemented my position as a capable, respected, and unassailable leader. The promotion, when it arrived, would no longer be an elusive aspiration. It would be the logical, indisputable result of my hard work, intelligence, and strategic foresight. In that moment of quiet reflection, I realized that the real victory was not merely the title or recognition, but the proof to myself that I had the ability to transform frustration into action, doubt into measurable results, and oversight into opportunity. I had done more than claim what I was owed. I had proven that persistence, planning, and quiet determination can turn the most discouraging setbacks into the most undeniable triumphs. And as I closed my notebook, turned off my computer, and left the office, I felt a sense of completeness and empowerment I had never known. A recognition that the course of my professional life had been irrevocably altered by the plan I had quietly, meticulously executed, leaving no room for doubt, question, or denial.